Get out of here before I have security throw you out like the trash you are. Madison Sterling's hand strikes flesh with a crack that silences every conversation in the plaza ballroom. The elegant black woman stumbles backward, blood trickling from her split lip as Madison towers over her with predatory satisfaction. That's what happens when you don't know your place. Madison grabs the woman's designer purse, dumping its contents across the marble floor, lipstick, keys, and a phone scattering like dice. Let's see what you stole! 200 Manhattan elites stand frozen, phones recording as Madison kicks the woman's belongings with her Louboutin heel. The humiliated woman kneels slowly, gathering her scattered possessions with mechanical precision, her white dress now stained with wine and blood. Madison's voice booms across the ballroom. I am Madison Sterling. My family owns half this city. She plants her foot on the woman's phone. Do you know who I am? The woman looks up from the floor, blood on her lips, something dangerous flickering in her eyes. Her voice is whisper soft, but somehow fills the entire room. Yes. Do you know who I am? What Madison Sterling doesn't realize is that she just humiliated the most powerful woman on Wall Street. 3 hours before the slap that would destroy the Sterling empire, Madison Sterling stands before her walk-in closet, selecting weapons for tonight's social battlefield. The penthouse overlooks Central Park from the 68th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime. Each piece of jewelry in her collection represents another victory in Manhattan's endless social wars. Charles, remind me again why we're courting these diversity investors? Madison holds up a Cartier necklace against her throat, the diamonds catching light from the crystal chandelier above. Her reflection in the antique mirror shows a woman accustomed to getting exactly what she wants, when she wants it, without question or compromise. Charles Sterling adjusts his bow tie with nervous fingers, his face pale beneath his expensive haircut. Because, darling, Pinnacle Investment Group controls $52 billion. Without their backing, the Manhattan Harbor project dies. His voice carries the strain of a man watching his family's legacy hang by a thread spun from increasingly desperate circumstances. Madison's laugh is sharp as breaking glass. 52 billion controlled by people who think they belong in our world. She fastens the necklace with practiced efficiency, each movement calculated for maximum impact. These new money types always forget their place eventually. They need reminding of the natural order. The Sterling family has owned Manhattan real estate for 3 generations, their name carved into the city's foundation alongside the Astors and Vanderbilts. Their grandfather purchased the first Manhattan properties in 1924, building an empire through strategic acquisitions and carefully cultivated political connections. Tonight's charity gala represents more than networking. It's Madison's chance to secure the $2.3 billion investment that will cement the Sterling name for another century. Madison moves to her vanity, applying lipstick with the precision of a surgeon. In the mirror, she watches Charles pace behind her, his anxiety radiating like heat from a furnace. The diversity quotas are getting ridiculous, she continues, her voice steady as steel. Half these people at tonight's gala wouldn't have been allowed through the service entrance 20 years ago. Now they expect to sit at our tables, drink our wine, pretend they understand centuries of breeding and culture. Charles stops pacing, his reflection meeting hers in the mirror. Madison, please. We need this deal. Whatever personal opinions you have about social changes. Personal opinions? Madison spins to face him, her eyes blazing with the righteous fury of someone who believes their prejudices are facts. Charles, I built our social reputation while you hid in boardrooms. I know exactly how to handle these situations. She stands, smoothing her designer gown with hands that have never known manual labor, never touched anything rougher than Egyptian cotton. These people respect strength. They need to understand the natural hierarchy that keeps society functioning properly. The Sterling name carries weight in Manhattan's elite circles, but that weight increasingly feels more like a burden than a blessing. Property taxes have skyrocketed, development costs have tripled, and younger investors with aggressive portfolios are reshaping the landscape. The Manhattan Harbor project represents Charles's attempt to prove the Sterling legacy still matters in a changing world. Madison examines herself in the full-length mirror, adjusting her stance for maximum intimidation factor. Tonight, I identify the decision-maker from Pinnacle, assess their weaknesses, and establish proper social boundaries. They'll understand their role in our world by midnight. The limousine ride to the Plaza Hotel passes in strategic planning, Manhattan's glittering towers sliding past bulletproof windows like a movie set designed to showcase their dominance. Madison studies the guest list on her phone, memorizing names and faces of potential threats to the evening's mission. Her finger stops on one entry, Pinnacle Investment Group delegation. No photos available for their representatives, she murmurs, scrolling through deliberately sparse information. How convenient. Probably some affirmative action hire who thinks a business degree makes them our equal. Charles stares out the window at the city his great-grandfather helped build, watching yellow taxis weave between Blacktown cars like worker ants around luxury beetles. The Pinnacle CEO is supposedly brilliant. Harvard MBA built the fund from nothing in 15 years. Wall Street Journal called them the most influential investor you've never heard of. Madison's smile could freeze champagne in crystal glasses. Brilliant at what? Diversity hiring, government handouts, playing the victim card until someone gives them money to manage? She snaps her phone shut with decisive authority. I'll identify them within minutes. They always stand out, trying too hard, wearing knockoff jewelry, that desperate hunger in their eyes when they realize they're swimming with sharks. The Plaza Hotel's red carpet stretches before them like a crimson tongue, photographers' flashes exploding like fireworks as Manhattan's elite emerge from their armored vehicles. Madison Sterling steps onto the carpet with the confidence of someone who has never doubted her place in the world's hierarchy, never questioning whether she deserved the oxygen she breathes. Inside the ballroom, Madison surveys her domain with the satisfaction of a queen reviewing her court. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across faces worth billions, conversations flowing around charitable donations that serve as tax write-offs and social positioning tools. She moves through the crowd like a shark through familiar waters, accepting air kisses and calculating alliances with the precision of a military strategist. Madison, darling, listen. Eleanor Whitworth approaches, her ancient jewelry rattling like wind chimes in a hurricane. I heard about the Pinnacle situation. How deliciously challenging for you. Madison accepts a glass of Dom Perignon from a passing server, her eyes scanning the room for potential threats and opportunities. Nothing I can't handle, Eleanor. These people always reveal their true nature under pressure. It's simply a matter of applying the right leverage at the right moment. Near the auction display showcasing items donated by Manhattan's most exclusive families, Madison spots her target. A woman in an elegant black dress standing alone, studying the charity information with what appears to be genuine interest rather than calculated networking behavior. No entourage, no obvious wealth display, no desperate schmoozing with recognizable power players. Perfect prey for tonight's lesson in social hierarchy. Madison approaches with predatory grace, her voice carrying just enough volume to attract nearby attention from potential witnesses. Excuse me, but I don't believe we've met. I'm Madison Sterling. She extends her hand with calculated warmth designed to establish immediate dominance. Are you here with someone tonight? What Madison Sterling doesn't realize is that she has just identified her target correctly, but catastrophically misjudged who holds the real power in this room. 4 hours before Madison Sterling's world would collapse, Serena Williams Davis sits in her corner office on the 52nd floor of the Pinnacle Tower, Manhattan's financial district spread beneath her like a chessboard. The morning sun casts long shadows across reports that could reshape entire economies with a single signature. Her assistant, Marcus, enters with the reverence of someone approaching a sleeping tiger. The Federal Reserve chairman is holding on line 1, and Senator Warren's office called about the banking reform testimony next week. Serena doesn't look up from the Sterling Properties investigation file spread across her mahogany desk. 6 months of research fills 3 bankers' boxes, each document a piece of evidence in a pattern of systematic exploitation that makes her stomach turn. Property seizures in predominantly black neighborhoods, predatory lending practices targeting Latino families, environmental violations in low-income areas, all bearing the Sterling signature. Tell Jerome I'll call him back after the market close, and confirm with Senator Warren's office that I'll have the full Sterling report ready for the committee. Her voice carries the quiet authority of someone who has learned that real power never needs to raise its voice. Marcus nods, understanding that when Serena speaks in that particular tone, entire industries should pay attention. The charity gala tonight. Your security team is asking about protocols. Serena finally looks up, her eyes reflecting the weight of managing $52 billion in assets for pension funds, university endowments, and charitable foundations that trust her to protect their futures. No security tonight. I want to observe the Sterlings in their natural habitat without any barriers between us. The Pinnacle Investment Group represents more than money. It represents hope for institutions that serve working families, students, and communities often ignored by traditional Wall Street firms. Serena built the fund from nothing, starting with a $40,000 loan and the radical idea that investment strategies should benefit society, not just shareholders. Her phone buzzes with a text from Federal Reserve Governor Williams. Sterling situation looking worse. Your investigation may trigger congressional action. Serena types back, "That's exactly what I'm counting on." The Sterling Properties file contains enough evidence to destroy the family empire 3 times over. But Serena needs something more. She needs to understand the moral character of the people behind the corruption. Tonight's charity gala offers the perfect opportunity to witness Madison and Charles Sterling when they believe they're among friends. Serena stands, moving to the window overlooking the harbor where Charles Sterling plans to build his latest monument to excess. The Manhattan Harbor project would displace 300 low-income families while creating luxury condominiums for overseas investors who would leave them empty 11 months per year. The $2.3 billion investment Pinnacle is supposedly considering would fund this social catastrophe. Marcus, cancel my afternoon meetings. I want to review every Sterling transaction from the past decade one more time. The files reveal a pattern of calculated cruelty that goes beyond simple business ruthlessness. The Sterlings deliberately target vulnerable communities, using legal technicalities to seize properties from families who have lived in the same neighborhoods for generations. They've perfected the art of legal theft, hiding behind environmental regulations they helped write and zoning laws they purchased through campaign contributions. Serena's phone rings again, this time her mentor from Harvard Business School. "Serena, I heard you're considering the Sterling deal. Those people are poison. Whatever they're offering, it's not worth the reputation damage." "I'm not considering anything, Professor Martinez. I'm documenting everything." Serena's voice carries a coldness that would make Madison Sterling nervous if she possessed the intelligence to recognize danger. Sometimes the best way to expose corruption is to let it expose itself. The investigation began when Maria Gonzalez contacted Pinnacle's Victim Advocacy Division, desperate to save her family's brownstone from Sterling's predatory refinancing scheme. Maria's grandmother purchased the property in 1963 with money saved from cleaning offices in Midtown Manhattan, building generational wealth through decades of sacrifice. Sterling Properties convinced Maria to refinance at what seemed like favorable terms, then used hidden clauses to seize the property when she missed a single payment during her mother's cancer treatment. Serena opens Maria's file, studying photographs of 3 generations of the Gonzalez family standing proudly in front of their Brooklyn home. The final photo shows Maria and her elderly mother sitting on boxes in a shelter, their life savings vanished into Sterling's corporate machinery. "This ends tonight," Serena murmurs to herself, her voice carrying the promise of someone who has never lost a battle that mattered. Her evening preparation involves more than selecting appropriate attire. It requires strategic planning for a confrontation that will determine whether justice exists for families like the Gonzalez clan. Serena chooses a simple black dress, elegant but understated, designed to blend into the background while she observes her targets. The drive to the Plaza Hotel provides time for final meditation on the evening's objectives. Serena needs Madison Sterling to reveal her true character in front of witnesses, preferably with cameras recording. The investigation file provides ammunition for legal action, but public opinion requires a more visceral demonstration of the Sterling family's moral bankruptcy. Serena's phone displays 17 missed calls from Charles Sterling's office, each message growing more desperate as Sterling Properties faces liquidity challenges that only Pinnacle's investment can solve. She deletes them without listening. understanding that desperation makes people careless, and careless people make mistakes. At the Plaza Hotel's entrance, Serena pauses to study the red carpet spectacle, watching Manhattan's elite perform their ritual displays of wealth and status. These people control more resources than most nations, yet they spend their evenings celebrating themselves while families like the Gonzalez clan sleep in shelters. Inside the ballroom, Serena moves through the crowd with the invisibility that comes from being underestimated. She studies faces worth billions, listening to conversations about tax avoidance schemes and political influence that would make ordinary Americans sick with rage. When Madison Sterling approaches with her practiced smile and predatory confidence, Serena feels the familiar calm that settles over her before major battles. Madison's opening words reveal everything Serena needs to know about the evening's trajectory. "Excuse me, but I don't believe we've met. I'm Madison Sterling. Are you here with someone tonight?" Serena meets Madison's gaze with the steady composure of someone who has just confirmed her enemy's identity. "I'm going solo this evening. The cause seemed worthwhile." What Madison Sterling doesn't realize is that she has just initiated a conversation with the most powerful woman on Wall Street, and Serena Williams Davis is about to teach her a lesson about real power. Madison Sterling circles her prey with the confidence of someone who has never encountered an opponent capable of fighting back. The charity auction display provides perfect staging for tonight's lesson in social hierarchy, with crystal champagne flutes and priceless artifacts creating an elegant backdrop for what Madison considers necessary education. Finance. How fascinating. Madison's tone suggests otherwise, each syllable dripping with condescension designed to establish dominance. "I suppose there are so many opportunities in that field these days, what with all the diversity initiatives and special programs." Serena tilts her head slightly, studying Madison with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. The financial industry has certainly evolved. Merit tends to rise to the surface eventually. Merit. Madison's laugh carries across the immediate vicinity, drawing attention from nearby conversations. "Such an interesting concept in today's market." She gestures toward the auction display with her champagne glass, the movement calculated to showcase her 10-carat diamond ring. Of course, true success requires more than just academic credentials. It requires understanding of how society actually functions. Eleanor Whitworth and Patricia Vandenberg drift closer, sensing the familiar dynamic of Madison establishing social boundaries. Their presence provides the audience Madison craves for tonight's performance, witnesses to confirm the natural order that keeps their world functioning properly. "You're absolutely right about society functioning," Serena responds, her voice carrying an undertone that Madison's alcohol-enhanced confidence prevents her from recognizing as dangerous. "Power structures reveal themselves quite clearly under the right circumstances." Madison moves closer, emboldened by what she perceives as submission. "Exactly. I'm so pleased you understand. Too many people these days think they can simply insert themselves into situations where they don't belong." Her eyes scan Serena's dress with the practiced assessment of someone identifying counterfeit luxury goods. "That's a lovely dress, by the way. Nordstrom? Thank you for noticing." Serena's response provides no defensive explanation, no attempt to justify her choices, a response that irritates Madison more than outright defiance would have. The auction display features items donated by Manhattan's most established families: a Rothko painting from the Whitney collection, vintage wines from the Astor cellars, jewelry that once belonged to railroad heiresses. Madison positions herself strategically, using the artifacts as props in her performance of inherited superiority. "These pieces represent real American history," Madison announces, her voice carrying to ensure maximum audience participation. "Families who built this country, who understand the responsibility that comes with true wealth." She pauses dramatically, allowing her meaning to crystallize. "Not everyone can appreciate that kind of legacy." Serena's phone buzzes discreetly, a text from Marcus. "Sterling stock down 3% today. Liquidity concerns spreading." She glances at the message, her expression remaining neutral while calculating implications. Charles Sterling's desperation must be reaching critical levels if market rumors are affecting share prices before tonight's supposed deal announcement. "Legacy is certainly important," Serena agrees, her voice maintaining perfect composure. Though I find it interesting how some legacies are built on foundations that wouldn't survive close examination. Madison's eyes narrow slightly, alcohol and arrogance combining to produce dangerous overconfidence. I'm not sure what you're implying, but the Sterling family has been a pillar of this community for nearly a century. Our reputation speaks for itself. Reputations can be illuminating. Serena's word choice carries weight that Madison's privilege-clouded perception cannot detect, especially when examined in the proper context. Eleanor Whitworth interjects with the timing of someone accustomed to managing social tensions before they escalate beyond acceptable boundaries. Madison, darling, perhaps we should— No, Eleanor, I think this conversation is quite educational. Madison cuts off the intervention, her voice rising with the confidence of someone who has never faced consequences for crossing lines. I believe our new friend here has opinions about established families. I'd love to hear them. Serena observes the gathering crowd with the detachment of someone watching pieces align on a chessboard. Phones emerge discreetly, held at hip level by guests who sense developing drama worth documenting. The charity gala's elegant atmosphere begins shifting towards something more primal, the scent of blood in crystal-clear water. My opinions are based primarily on documented evidence, Serena responds, her voice carrying professorial authority that makes several nearby guests lean closer. Public records, legal filings, regulatory investigations, data tends to tell more honest stories than social reputations. Madison's champagne glass pauses halfway to her lips, some primitive instinct finally recognizing potential danger. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply noting that in my experience, the most interesting stories often involve families whose public charitable work contrasts sharply with their private business practices. Serena's words land with surgical precision, each syllable designed to probe for weaknesses in Madison's defensive armor. The auction display suddenly feels less like an elegant backdrop and more like an evidence exhibit, the donated luxury items representing wealth extracted from communities these families claim to serve through charity. Madison's donated necklace, a Bulgari piece worth $200,000, sits beside a sculpture donated by a family whose textile empire was built on sweatshop labor. You seem to know quite a bit about private business practices for someone in— What did you say your area was again? Madison's voice carries increasing hostility, her social radar finally detecting threat levels that should have been obvious minutes earlier. I specialize in comprehensive analysis of investment opportunities, Serena answers with devastating simplicity. Due diligence requires understanding all aspects of potential partners' operations. Madison's face flushes with the realization that this conversation has moved far beyond her comfort zone. Are you saying you're investigating my family? Serena's smile appears for the first time tonight, an expression that would make experienced prosecutors nervous. I'm saying that information has a way of revealing itself to people who know how to look. Eleanor Whitworth attempts another intervention, her voice carrying decades of experience managing Manhattan's social disasters. Perhaps we should discuss lighter topics. No. Madison's interruption carries the sharp edge of someone whose authority has been questioned for the first time in her privileged existence. I want to hear exactly what this person thinks she knows about my family. The crowd around them has grown to include recognizable faces from Forbes lists and political donor rolls, their conversation suspended in favor of witnessing what promises to be Manhattan's social theater at its most vicious. Camera phones record discreetly while champagne continues flowing, creating the perfect storm of documentation and disinhibition. Serena checks her phone again. Another message from Marcus. Federal Reserve concerned about sterling deal rumors affecting market confidence. She types back, markets are about to get much more interesting. What Madison Sterling doesn't realize is that she has just demanded exactly what Serena Williams Davis came here to provide. A public platform for truth that will destroy everything the Sterling name represents. The Plaza Ballroom falls into the peculiar hush that precedes social catastrophe, conversations dimming as Manhattan's elite sense blood in crystalline water. Madison Sterling stands at the epicenter of her own destruction. champagne courage fueling a confrontation that will be replayed millions of times across social media platforms within hours. I want to hear exactly what this person thinks she knows about my family. Madison's voice carries across marble floors with the authority of someone who has never been denied anything she demanded. The crowd forms a loose circle, phones emerging from designer clutches with the instinctive timing of predators sensing wounded prey. Serena Williams Davis stands perfectly still, her composure absolute as she observes Madison's alcohol-enhanced bravado transform into something far more dangerous. Mrs. Sterling, I think perhaps we should discuss this more privately. Don't you dare patronize me. Madison steps closer, her diamond jewelry catching chandelier light as she gestures expansively toward the gathering crowd. You come to my event in my city wearing your little costume and have the audacity to question my family's reputation? Her voice rises with each word, drawing attention from every corner of the ballroom like a siren call for social disaster. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Eleanor Whitworth places a restraining hand on Madison's arm, her decades of social experience recognizing the moment when privilege crosses into dangerous territory. Madison, darling, perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more appropriate. Madison shakes off the intervention with violent force, her movement causing champagne to splash across her Cartier bracelet and onto the marble floor. No, Eleanor, I'm tired of pretending these people belong in our world. She turns back to Serena, her eyes blazing with entitled fury that has been building for decades. You want to know about documentation and evidence? Let me give you some education about how the real world actually works. The crowd presses closer, sensing the approaching climax of Manhattan's social theater that will be discussed in these circles for generations. Charles Sterling appears at the periphery, his face pale with the recognition that his wife's performance is spiraling beyond any possibility of damage control. He attempts to approach through the human wall, but the circle has solidified into an amphitheater of anticipation. My great-grandfather built half of Manhattan when your people were... Madison catches herself on the edge of an abyss, some remaining thread of self-preservation warning her away from the words forming on her tongue like molten lava seeking release. Serena's voice cuts through the tension with laser precision, her tone carrying the quiet authority of someone completely comfortable with confrontation. When my people were what, Mrs. Sterling? Please, finish your thought. The question hangs in perfumed air like a blade suspended over Madison's reputation. Around them, camera phones record with the dedication of documentary filmmakers, their operators understanding they are witnessing history being made in real time. The charity auction continues in the background, the auctioneer's voice providing a surreal counterpoint to the destruction unfolding in the ballroom's center. Madison's face flushes crimson, alcohol and rage combining to obliterate any remaining social filters that might have saved her family's reputation. When your people were cleaning our offices and grateful for the opportunity. The words escape before her brain can stop them, each syllable landing like acid on marble. At least then you knew your place in society and didn't have delusions about belonging where you clearly don't fit. The collective intake of breath sounds like wind rushing through broken glass. Eleanor Whitworth steps backward, her face showing the horror of someone watching a friend walk into traffic. Charles Sterling stops moving entirely, understanding that his wife has just detonated their family's future with 27 carefully chosen words that will echo through social media for years. Serena remains motionless, her expression unchanging as she absorbs the full force of Madison's hatred, with the composure of someone who has faced far worse opponents than a privileged socialite having a public breakdown. Interesting perspective, Mrs. Sterling. Please continue with your analysis. Continue? Madison laughs with the manic energy of someone whose inhibitions have completely disintegrated under the pressure of perceived threat to her worldview. Oh, I'm just getting started with your education about reality. She gestures around the ballroom with sweeping arrogance that encompasses crystal chandeliers, priceless artwork, and faces worth billions. Look around you. Every person in this room represents real accomplishment, real contribution to society. We built the museums, the universities, the hospitals that make civilization possible. Patricia Vandenberg attempts to intervene, her voice carrying desperate urgency born from decades of managing Manhattan social disasters. Madison, I really think this has gone far enough. And then people like you show up with your government programs and your diversity quotas, thinking you can just walk into our world and demand equal treatment. Madison's voice rises to near-shouting levels, her words echoing off crystal chandeliers and marble columns like accusations hurled in a cathedral. You want to lecture me about business practices? My family has been creating jobs and building communities since before your grandparents learned to read English properly. Serena's phone buzzes with an incoming call, the Federal Reserve Chairman's private number displaying on the screen. She glances at the notification, then back at Madison with the calculating gaze of someone watching an opponent destroy themselves more thoroughly than any external attack could accomplish. Mrs. Sterling, I think you should consider the implications of... Serena's measured response is interrupted by Madison's explosive reaction that sends champagne droplets flying. Consider what? Considering that I should apologize for my family's success, consider that I should pretend we're equals when anyone with functioning eyes can see the obvious differences. Madison's gesture encompasses Serena's entire appearance, her meaning unmistakable to everyone present. You can put on expensive clothes and learn big words from whatever diversity program helped you, but you'll never understand what it means to carry real responsibility for society's welfare. The crowd stands frozen in collective horror, witnessing the kind of public racism that most Manhattan elite prefer to express in private code words and carefully constructed euphemisms. Camera phones capture every gesture, every facial expression, every droplet of spittle that accompanies Madison's increasingly unhinged performance, documenting a moment that will define the Sterling family legacy forever. Charles Sterling finally breaks through the human circle, his face showing the desperation of someone watching his life's work dissolve in real time like sugar in acid rain. Madison, stop! Just stop talking right now before you destroy everything we've built. His wife spins toward him with fury that has found its perfect target for decades of accumulated resentment. Don't you dare tell me to stop, Charles. This is exactly what I've been talking about. You've gotten so weak that you won't even defend our family's honor when it's being attacked by people who should be grateful we even acknowledge their existence. Our family's honor? Charles's voice carries the strain of someone watching 3 generations of careful reputation management evaporate in minutes. Madison, you're destroying everything we've worked for, everything my grandfather built. Madison turns back to Serena, her face twisted with the kind of hatred that emerges when privilege encounters challenges it cannot control through traditional power structures. And you, standing there with that smug expression, thinking you're so much better than everyone else? Let me tell you exactly what I see when I look at you. The ballroom falls completely silent, even the servers stopping their movements as Madison Sterling prepares to cross the final line between social acceptability and career-ending disaster. The auction has stopped entirely, the auctioneer's gavel frozen mid-air as he witnesses social history being made. I see someone who thinks she can waltz into our world and lecture us about morality. Someone who probably got her job through affirmative action and thinks that makes her our equal. Madison's voice drops to a venomous whisper that somehow carries to every corner of the room. But you'll always be what you are, trash trying to pass for class and failing miserably at it. The slap that follows echoes through the plaza ballroom like a gunshot. Madison's open palm connecting with Serena's face with enough force to snap her head sideways and send her earring flying across the marble floor. The sound reverberates off marble walls and crystal fixtures, creating a moment of absolute silence that seems to suspend time itself. Serena stands motionless for 10 seconds that feel like eternity, a thin line of blood appearing at the corner of her mouth where Madison's diamond ring made contact. Around them, 200 of Manhattan's most powerful people stand frozen in collective shock, witnessing the kind of public violence that destroys reputations and ends dynasties. Madison Sterling straightens her designer gown with trembling hands, her breathing heavy with exertion and twisted satisfaction. "Now you know exactly where you stand," she announces to the silent crowd, her voice carrying the triumph of someone who believes she has just restored the natural order of civilization. Serena slowly raises her hand to touch the blood on her lip. her movements deliberate and precise as she examines the evidence on her fingertips. When she finally speaks, her voice carries the quiet authority of someone who has just decided to end a war. "Mrs. Sterling," she says, reaching into her purse with surgical precision, "I think it's time you learned who you just slapped." The moment of reckoning has arrived, and Madison Sterling is about to discover that some mistakes cannot be undone. The silence that follows Serena's words feels like the moment before an earthquake, when even the birds stop singing and the air itself seems to hold its breath. Madison Sterling stands frozen in her moment of perceived triumph, blood on her knuckles from where her diamond ring connected with flesh, completely unaware that she has just crossed a line that will obliterate everything her family has built. Serena Williams-Davis removes her phone from her purse with the deliberate precision of a surgeon selecting the perfect scalpel. Her movements are unhurried, almost ceremonial, as if she's performing a ritual that has been rehearsed 1,000 times in boardrooms where trillion-dollar decisions are made with similar calm authority. The phone screen illuminates her face as she scrolls through her contacts, blood still glistening at the corner of her mouth like war paint. The crowd presses closer, sensing that whatever happens next will reshape their understanding of power in ways they cannot yet comprehend. "James, this is Serena Williams-Davis." Her voice cuts through the ballroom's cathedral silence with the clarity of someone accustomed to being heard by presidents and prime ministers. Madison's champagne-clouded brain struggles to process the name, some distant recognition struggling through layers of alcohol and arrogance. Around her, faces in the crowd begin changing expression as neural connections fire and Manhattan's elite start placing the name they've heard whispered in financial circles for years. Cancel the Sterling deal. All $2.3 billion immediately. Full withdrawal from all Sterling Properties investments effective this moment. The words land like physical blows, each syllable driving Madison's world deeper into chaos. Charles Sterling appears behind her, his face transitioning from confusion to recognition to absolute horror as understanding crashes over him like a tsunami. "What are you talking about?" Madison's voice cracks with the first tremor of uncertainty, her brain finally beginning to process that something has gone catastrophically wrong with her carefully orchestrated humiliation. Serena ends the call and turns to face the crowd that has unconsciously formed a perfect circle around them, her movement slow and deliberate as a queen addressing her court. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe introductions are in order." Eleanor Whitworth's champagne glass slips from nerveless fingers, shattering on marble with a sound like breaking bones. Patricia Vandenberg audibly gasps, her hand flying to her throat as recognition dawns with the force of revelation. "I am Serena Williams-Davis, Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Investment Group. We manage $52 billion in assets for pension funds, university endowments, and charitable foundations that serve working families across America." Madison's world tilts on its axis as her brain struggles to reconcile the woman she just slapped with the name that appears on Federal Reserve Advisory Committees and Senate Banking Committee witness lists. Serena Williams-Davis, the woman Forbes called the most powerful investor you've never heard of. "That's impossible," Madison whispers, though her voice carries no conviction, only the desperate hope of someone clinging to the edge of a cliff. "You can't be—" "Mrs. Sterling, you asked if I knew who you were. I do. You're the wife of a man whose company is worth approximately $3 billion, which represents roughly 6% of the assets I control. You're also the woman who just committed assault and battery against me in front of 200 witnesses." Charles Sterling pushes through the crowd with the desperation of someone trying to stop an avalanche with his bare hands. "Miss Williams-Davis, please, there's been a terrible misunderstanding." Serena's gaze shifts to him with the cool assessment of someone evaluating a business proposition that has just revealed fatal flaws. "Mr. Sterling, no misunderstanding. Your wife asked me to finish my thoughts about family legacies built on foundations that wouldn't survive examination. Consider this my complete analysis." Madison sinks to her knees on the marble floor, her designer gown pooling around her like spilled wine, finally understanding that she has destroyed not just her own reputation, but 3 generations of careful empire building. "Please, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were." But I knew exactly who you were, Mrs. Sterling. I've spent 6 months investigating your family's business practices. Predatory lending targeting minority communities, the environmental violations in low-income neighborhoods, the systematic exploitation of families who trusted your company with their life savings. The crowd around them has grown to include virtually every significant financial figure in Manhattan, their conversations forgotten as they witness the destruction of one of the city's oldest real estate dynasties. Camera phones document every moment, every expression, creating evidence that will redefine power dynamics in their exclusive world. Charles Sterling's face shows the gray pallor of someone watching his legacy evaporate in real time. The investigation. We can explain everything. The deals can be restructured. Mr. Sterling, there will be no deals. There will be no restructuring. Pinnacle Investment Group will be recommending to our network of institutional investors that they avoid all Sterling Properties investments until federal investigations are complete. Madison remains on her knees, tears streaming down her face as she finally comprehends the magnitude of her destruction. Charles, fix this. Please fix this. Her husband stares at her with the expression of someone seeing a stranger wearing his wife's face. There's nothing I can do, Madison. She's Pinnacle. She's everything we needed to survive. Serena adjusts her purse strap with movements that suggest the evening's business has concluded satisfactorily. Good evening, everyone. The crowd parts before her like water, Manhattan's elite unconsciously acknowledging the presence of someone whose power operates on levels they're only beginning to understand. What Madison Sterling doesn't realize is that her humiliation has only just begun. Within 30 minutes of Serena Williams Davis walking out of the Plaza Ballroom, Madison Sterling's world begins disintegrating at the speed of light traveling through fiber optic cables. The first video uploads to Twitter while she's still on her knees, tears streaming down her face as Charles attempts damage control that arrives several disasters too late. Jennifer Walsh, a technology journalist attending the charity gala, live streams the aftermath to her 40,000 followers with the breathless excitement of someone witnessing history. Guys, you are not going to believe what just happened at the Sterling Charity Gala. I'm literally shaking right now. Madison Sterling just slapped the CEO of Pinnacle Investment Group in front of everyone, and it's about to get so much worse. The hashtag #WallStreetSlap begins trending on Twitter within minutes, propelled by videos shot from 7 different angles showing Madison's racist tirade, followed by the moment Serena revealed her identity. Each clip captures different aspects of the destruction, Madison's vicious words, the sound of the slap echoing through marble halls, Charles Sterling's face when he realized his wife had just destroyed their empire. Rebecca Martinez, a politics reporter for The Washington Post, tweets from the Plaza bathroom where she's hiding to write her breaking news story. Breaking, Madison Sterling, wife of real estate mogul Charles Sterling, caught on video making racist comments and physically assaulting Pinnacle Investment CEO Serena Williams Davis at Manhattan Charity Gala. Video shows Williams Davis immediately canceling $2.3 billion investment deal. The video spreads across social media platforms with the infectious velocity of a pandemic, each share adding commentary that amplifies the story's reach exponentially. TikTok users create reaction videos within hours, their faces showing genuine shock as they watch privileged white women destroy herself in real time. The algorithm pushes Madison Sterling content to millions of feeds, transforming her personal catastrophe into global entertainment. Dr. Kimberly Jackson, a sociology professor at Columbia University, provides academic context in a Twitter thread that goes viral independently. What we're witnessing in the #WallStreetSlap video is the intersection of racism, classism, and economic power playing out in real time. Madison Sterling's assumptions about who belongs in elite spaces reveal the ugly foundation of American wealth inequality. Thread, 1/47 inches. Financial markets begin reacting before the closing bell, Sterling Properties stock dropping 12% in after-hours trading as institutional investors process news that their largest potential investment partner has publicly severed all relationships. Bloomberg terminal screens across Manhattan flash red with Sterling-related securities losing value as algorithms programmed to respond to social media sentiment trigger massive sell-offs. Maria Gonzalez, whose family lost their Brooklyn brownstone to Sterling's predatory lending practices, watches the video from her studio apartment with tears streaming down her face. She shares the clip with her network of displaced families, adding commentary that transforms the story from elite drama into something far more meaningful. "This is the woman whose company stole my grandmother's house. Watch her get exactly what she deserves." The story jumps from social media to traditional news outlets within 2 hours, editors at CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News scrambling to contextualize footage that seems too explosive to be real. Anderson Cooper's producers begin reaching out to Pinnacle Investment Group for exclusive interviews, while Tucker Carlson's team prepares segments about cancel culture attacking successful families. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweets to her 13 million followers, "Racism and classism aren't abstract concepts. They're systems of oppression that play out exactly like this video. When someone shows you who they are, believe them." Proud of at Serena Williams D for using her power to fight predatory lending. #Wall Street slap. Senator Elizabeth Warren's communications team issued a statement within 3 hours. "The Sterling family's behavior represents everything wrong with our financial system. We're announcing immediate hearings into predatory lending practices by real estate companies, starting with Sterling Properties' targeting of minority communities." International news outlets pick up the story with varying perspectives that reflect their audience's relationship with American wealth inequality. The BBC runs analytical segments about systemic racism in American financial institutions, while German news programs use Madison Sterling as an example of American oligarchy's moral bankruptcy. Japanese television networks focus on the business implications, analyzing how a single viral moment can destroy decades of wealth accumulation. YouTube compilation videos begin appearing with titles like "Racist Billionaire's Wife Gets Instant Karma" and "When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong, Elite Edition." These videos accumulate millions of views within hours, their comment sections becoming battlegrounds between those celebrating Madison's downfall and others defending her right to express opinions without consequences. Sterling Properties corporate offices become chaos zones as employees leak internal emails to journalists, revealing years of racist language and discriminatory practices that suddenly seem relevant to news organizations. Human resources documents surface showing systematic bias in hiring practices, while accounting records reveal tax avoidance schemes specifically designed to avoid funding programs that benefit minority communities. The charity gala's other attendees begin distancing themselves from the Sterlings with statements released through publicists and crisis management firms. Eleanor Whitworth issues a carefully worded condemnation. "Madison Sterling's behavior last night does not represent the values of our philanthropic community. Racism has no place in charitable work." Patricia Vandenberg goes further, announcing her family's foundation will no longer partner with Sterling-affiliated organizations. Facebook groups dedicated to tracking predatory lending practices explode with new membership as the Sterling story introduces mainstream audiences to concepts like environmental racism and systematic wealth extraction from minority communities. The video becomes an educational tool and entertainment simultaneously, teaching viewers about financial corruption while providing a satisfying spectacle of a privileged woman destroying herself. Corporate sponsors begin withdrawing support from Sterling Properties developments within hours, their brand management teams recognizing association with Madison Sterling represents public relations suicide. The Manhattan Harbor project loses 3 major investors before midnight, their withdrawal statements citing incompatible values and business practices. Construction companies contracted for Sterling projects start questioning whether association with the family will damage their own reputations. Reddit threads dissecting every frame of the video accumulate thousands of comments analyzing body language, facial expressions, and background reactions from other gala attendees. Users identify other wealthy individuals in the footage, speculating about their thoughts as they witnessed Madison's meltdown. The platform's collective detective work uncovers additional context about Sterling family history and previous controversial incidents that mainstream media missed. Serena Williams Davis maintains strategic silence throughout the viral explosion, her communications team releasing only a brief statement. Miss Williams-Davis will not be commenting on last night's incident beyond noting that Pinnacle Investment Group's investigation into Sterling Properties will be shared with appropriate regulatory authorities. The restraint makes her appear more powerful than any lengthy statement could, letting Madison Sterling's own words serve as prosecution evidence. The FBI's white-collar crime division receives dozens of tips about Sterling Properties business practices, citizens who watched the viral video deciding to report suspicious activities they previously ignored. Federal investigators find themselves with enough leads to justify comprehensive investigation into the Sterling family's financial empire, including potential tax evasion and housing discrimination violations. Late-night comedy shows begin incorporating Madison Sterling into monologues, her racist tirade becoming source material for comedians who transform her hatred into punchlines that further damage her reputation. Stephen Colbert's impression of Madison asking, "Do you know who I am?" becomes a viral meme format used to mock entitled behavior across social media platforms. The Plaza Hotel releases a statement distancing itself from the incident while noting their commitment to inclusive hospitality. The Plaza Hotel serves guests from all backgrounds and does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Last night's incident does not reflect our values or standards. Other luxury venues begin reviewing their guest policies, afraid of being associated with similar incidents that could damage their brand reputations. Mental health professionals begin using Madison Sterling's video as a case study in how privilege and racism intersect to create destructive behavior patterns. Dr. Sarah Carter, a psychiatrist who specializes in treating wealthy families, appears on CNN to discuss how isolation from consequences can lead to catastrophic moral failures. When someone spends their entire life insulated from accountability, they lose the ability to recognize when they're crossing fundamental moral boundaries. Technology companies scramble to manage the content moderation challenges posed by viral videos containing clear hate speech and physical violence. The clips exist in gray areas of platform policies, representing newsworthy content that also violates community standards about harassment and discrimination. Anonymous accounts begin posting additional videos from previous Sterling family events, revealing a pattern of discriminatory behavior that makes the Plaza Hotel incident appear symptomatic rather than aberrant. These supplementary videos provide context that transforms Madison Sterling from isolated bad actor into representative of systemic problems within America's wealthy elite. By midnight, Madison Sterling's name appears in over 2 million social media posts across all platforms, her face becoming an internationally recognizable symbol of American racism and privilege. The woman who wanted everyone to know who she was has achieved her goal in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Charles Sterling spends the night in emergency meetings with crisis management firms, bankruptcy attorneys, and family therapists, trying to determine whether anything can be salvaged from the wreckage his wife created in less than 10 minutes. His phone buzzes constantly with calls from investors, partners, and board members, all seeking answers to questions that have no good responses. Madison Sterling sits alone in her penthouse, watching her life's work disintegrate one viral share at a time, finally understanding that some mistakes cannot be undone by money, influence, or carefully crafted apologies. The digital age has transformed personal destruction into public entertainment, and she just became its newest star. The internet has rendered its verdict, and Madison Sterling's conviction is unanimous. Serena Williams-Davis arrives at the Pinnacle Investment Group headquarters at 5:30 in the morning, 3 hours earlier than her usual schedule, moving through the building's marble lobby with the purposeful stride of someone who has decided to go to war against an entire system of exploitation. The elevator carries her to the 52nd floor in silence, giving her time to review the mental checklist of actions that will transform last night's personal confrontation into systematic institutional change that will reverberate through financial markets for decades to come. Her corner office overlooks Manhattan's financial district, the sunrise casting long shadows across trading floors where billions of dollars change hands before most people finish their morning coffee. This morning, those transactions will include the complete liquidation of Pinnacle's Sterling Properties positions, a process that will send shockwaves through real estate markets from coast to coast while triggering investigations that could reshape entire industries and establish new precedents for corporate accountability. Marcus Carter, her chief of staff, enters carrying 3 banker's boxes and the exhausted expression of someone who has spent the night coordinating with federal investigators, congressional staff members, international financial regulatory agencies, and victim advocacy groups across 12 states. The FBI white-collar crime unit wants to meet at 9. Senator Warren's office called 6 times. The Federal Reserve Chairman is holding for you on the secure line. CNN's Anderson Cooper is requesting an exclusive interview. The Securities and Exchange Commission just opened a formal investigation, and the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division wants immediate briefing on discrimination evidence. Serena doesn't look up from the Sterling Properties investigation files spread across her mahogany desk like evidence in a murder trial that will determine whether systematic corporate exploitation can be prosecuted as organized crime. 6 months of meticulous research fills every available surface, each document a piece of evidence in a pattern of exploitation that extends far beyond simple business misconduct into the realm of systematic human rights violations that constitute crimes against humanity perpetrated through financial instruments designed to circumvent regulatory oversight. Tell the FBI we'll meet at 10. I want our presentation materials perfect before we share them with law enforcement. Her voice carries the calm authority of someone who has spent 15 years building bulletproof cases against institutions that believe themselves untouchable by legal consequences. Schedule the Fed chairman for after lunch. This conversation requires his complete attention and understanding of systematic risks. Tell Anderson Cooper we'll consider the interview after federal authorities have reviewed our findings. Inform the SEC will provide full cooperation with their investigation, and tell the Justice Department we'll have comprehensive civil rights violation evidence ready within 48 hours. The investigation began when Maria Gonzalez contacted Pinnacle's Victim Advocacy Division 6 months ago, but it expanded far beyond the single family's tragedy as Serena's research team uncovered patterns that revealed the true scope of Sterling Properties' systematic targeting of vulnerable communities across 12 states and multiple demographic groups. The files document hundreds of families whose generational wealth was deliberately extracted through predatory lending schemes designed to circumvent federal fair housing protections while exploiting regulatory gaps that allow legal theft of community assets. Marcus opens the first banker's box, revealing financial documents that read like blueprints for economic warfare against minority communities, each page documenting calculated strategies for wealth extraction that maximize profit while externalizing all social costs to taxpayer-funded services. The environmental racism evidence is particularly damning. Sterling Properties has systematically purchased land adjacent to toxic waste sites, then marketed those developments specifically to Latino families using Spanish-language advertisements that deliberately omit environmental hazard disclosures required by federal law. Serena examines aerial photographs showing Sterling developments clustered around chemical plants, landfills, and industrial facilities that create health hazards affecting 3 generations of families while generating environmental cleanup costs that Sterling Properties avoids through legal technicalities. The company's internal emails obtained through legal discovery and unrelated litigation reveal executives joking about strategic demographic targeting and maximizing profit from environmental externalities while discussing strategies to avoid environmental cleanup costs that should be internalized as business expenses. The predatory lending scheme operates with sophisticated understanding of federal regulations designed to prevent exactly this type of exploitation, using legal loopholes and regulatory gaps to circumvent consumer protection laws. Sterling Properties partners with small community banks to originate mortgages that appear legitimate during initial review, then uses legal technicalities embedded in refinancing agreements to seize properties when families face temporary financial stress caused by medical emergencies, job losses, or other economic disruptions that affect working-class households. Dr. James Wilson, the environmental health researcher whose family lost their home to Sterling schemes, provided testimony that appears in the second banker's box alongside medical records documenting elevated cancer rates in Sterling-developed neighborhoods compared to similar communities without environmental contamination. "My daughter developed leukemia at age 7, his statement reads. "We discovered later that Sterling Properties knew about contaminated groundwater before they sold us the house, but state disclosure laws didn't require them to inform buyers about historical pollution that continues affecting our children's health and development. The environmental health data reveals systematic patterns of what legal scholars term environmental apartheid, the deliberate concentration of environmental hazards in communities that lack political power to resist corporate exploitation or demand regulatory enforcement. Sterling Properties has perfected techniques for identifying neighborhoods where residents face language barriers, economic stress, immigration status concerns, or other vulnerabilities that prevent effective advocacy against predatory practices that would be immediately challenged in wealthier communities with greater political influence. The third banker's box contains evidence of Sterling Properties' tax avoidance strategies, including offshore shell companies designed to avoid funding educational programs and social services that benefit the same communities they're exploiting for profit. Internal accounting documents show the family has avoided paying approximately $400 million in taxes over the past decade through schemes that exist in legal gray areas between legitimate tax planning and outright fraud designed to avoid contributing to social infrastructure. Serena's phone buzzes constantly with updates from her research team, who have spent the night expanding their investigation to include Sterling Properties' political contributions and lobbying activities that reveal systematic corruption extending into government agencies responsible for regulatory oversight. The emerging picture reveals systematic corruption that extends into city planning departments, environmental regulatory agencies, housing authorities across 3 states, and congressional committees responsible for consumer protection legislation. The political angle is particularly damaging, Marcus reports, opening a laptop displaying network analysis charts that look like evidence from organized crime investigations conducted by federal racketeering prosecutors. Sterling Properties has spent $12 million over 8 years on campaign contributions and lobbying fees specifically targeting politicians who vote on environmental regulations and housing policies that affect their profit margins and operational freedom. The network analysis reveals Sterling's influence extending into congressional committees, state environmental agencies, municipal planning departments, and regulatory agencies where zoning decisions determine which communities bear the burden of environmental hazards, while others receive protection from industrial pollution. The family has essentially purchased regulatory capture, using campaign contributions to ensure government agencies protect their profits rather than public health or environmental safety standards that should apply equally to all communities. Federal investigators will discover that Sterling Properties' business model depends entirely on externalized costs, environmental cleanup, healthcare expenses for poisoned communities, social services for displaced families, and infrastructure maintenance, being absorbed by taxpayers while profits flow to offshore accounts that avoid contributing to the system that enables their wealth extraction through regulatory protection and political influence. Serena opens Maria Gonzalez's file again, studying photographs of 3 generations of women standing proudly in front of their Brooklyn brownstone before Sterling Properties convinced them to refinance at predatory terms designed to guarantee eventual default and property seizure. The final photo shows Maria and her elderly mother sitting on boxes outside a homeless shelter, their life savings vanished into Sterling's corporate machinery designed to extract maximum wealth while providing minimum accountability. The Gonzalez case represents more than individual tragedy, Serena tells Marcus, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understands how systematic injustice operates through seemingly legitimate business practices that exploit regulatory gaps. It's evidence of deliberate wealth extraction from communities that took generations to build economic stability through savings, home ownership, small business development, and community investment that creates generational prosperity. The investigation reveals that Sterling Properties specifically targets families whose properties have appreciated significantly due to neighborhood improvements, then uses refinancing offers to extract accumulated equity through terms that guarantee eventual default when families face temporary economic stress. The scheme operates like reverse gentrification, allowing wealthy developers to capture value created by working-class communities while displacing the people who created that value through decades of investment and community-building efforts. Marcus displays spreadsheets showing Sterling Properties has extracted over $6 billion in equity from minority-owned properties over the past 15 years, using legal mechanisms that technically comply with consumer protection regulations while violating their underlying intent to prevent exactly this type of systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations. The legal team says we have enough evidence for criminal referrals under RICO statutes, environmental crimes legislation, civil rights violations, tax evasion charges, and conspiracy to defraud consumers through systematic targeting. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act typically applies to organized crime families, but Sterling Properties' systematic exploitation of regulatory capture and coordinated wealth extraction meets every element of racketeering prosecution that federal prosecutors use against criminal enterprises. The family has operated essentially as a financial organized crime syndicate, using legitimate business structures to conduct systematic criminal activities while maintaining plausible deniability through legal technicalities and political protection. Additional evidence files reveal Sterling Properties' coordination with other real estate developers to manipulate local housing markets through systematic price fixing and coordinated targeting of specific neighborhoods for gentrification that displaces existing residents while extracting maximum value from properties through systematic exploitation. These coordination efforts constitute antitrust violations that could result in additional federal prosecution under Sherman Act provisions prohibiting conspiracy and restraint of trade. Serena's secure line rings with the Federal Reserve Chairman's morning briefing call, interrupting her review of environmental contamination evidence that reveals Sterling Properties' systematic concealment of health hazards affecting children's development. Jerome, I'm sending you preliminary findings from our Sterling Properties investigation. This goes beyond real estate misconduct into systematic threats to banking sector stability that could trigger broader financial crises if similar practices are widespread throughout the industry. Chairman Powell's voice carries the strain of someone managing multiple financial crises simultaneously while recognizing potential for systematic collapse that could require federal intervention. How bad are we talking, Serena? The overnight markets are already pricing in Sterling Properties' collapse, and we're seeing contagion effects in real estate investment trusts across the sector, with other developers facing increased scrutiny from institutional investors. Bad enough to trigger congressional hearings and possibly criminal prosecutions under federal racketeering statutes that could establish precedents for industry-wide accountability. Serena's response carries the weight of someone who doesn't make statements she cannot defend with evidence that would satisfy federal prosecutors and congressional oversight committees. Sterling Properties has been operating systematic predatory lending schemes that violate fair housing regulations while using political corruption to avoid regulatory oversight that should have stopped these practices years ago. The Federal Reserve's concern extends beyond a single company's misconduct into systematic risks posed by similar practices throughout the real estate industry that could destabilize housing markets nationwide. If Sterling Properties' business model represents widespread industry practice, the implications for housing market stability could trigger a financial crisis similar to the 2008 subprime mortgage collapse that required massive government bailouts and regulatory reform. Marcus opens another file containing testimony from Sterling Properties employees who contacted Pinnacle's whistleblower program after watching Madison Sterling's viral meltdown that revealed company culture encouraging systematic discrimination. We have former executives willing to testify about systematic discrimination in company hiring practices, internal emails using racial slurs to describe target communities, and accounting fraud designed to avoid taxes that fund social programs serving affected populations. The whistleblower testimony provides an internal perspective on Sterling Properties' corporate culture, revealing systematic racism that extends far beyond Madison Sterling's individual prejudices into institutional practices designed to maximize wealth extraction from minority communities while minimizing contribution to social infrastructure that supports those same communities through educational funding, healthcare access, and environmental protection. Schedule the FBI briefing for 10:30, Serena instructs Marcus, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose 6-month investigation has produced evidence sufficient to dismantle a criminal enterprise operating under legitimate business cover. And contact Senator Warren's office. Tell them we'll have complete findings ready for congressional testimony within 48 hours. Madison Sterling's slap has unleashed forces that will reshape how predatory lending is prosecuted in America. Within 48 hours of Serena Williams Davis's federal briefing, the Sterling Properties investigation transforms from a corporate accountability case into a national civil rights movement as victims across 12 states emerge from decades of silence to tell their stories. The FBI's white-collar crime division receives over 300 tips in the first 24 hours, each call representing families whose lives were destroyed by systematic predatory lending practices that federal prosecutors now recognize as organized criminal enterprise operating under legitimate business cover. Maria Gonzalez stands before news cameras outside the federal building in Lower Manhattan, her voice steady despite decades of trauma as she becomes the public face of systematic exploitation that destroyed generational wealth in communities across America. Sterling Properties didn't just take our house, she tells CNN's Anderson Cooper, holding a photograph of her grandmother standing proudly in front of their Brooklyn brownstone in 1963. They stole our family's future, our children's inheritance, our community's stability, and our faith that hard work leads to prosperity. The network interview airs during prime time, reaching 15 million viewers who witness Maria's transformation from isolated victim into powerful advocate for justice. Her grandmother purchased the brownstone with money saved from cleaning office buildings in Midtown Manhattan, building generational wealth through decades of sacrifice that Sterling Properties systematically extracted through refinancing schemes designed to guarantee eventual default and community displacement while maximizing profit extraction. Dr. Sarah Carter, a psychiatrist who specializes in treating trauma from financial exploitation, appears alongside Maria to provide clinical context for systematic abuse that extends beyond individual cases into community-wide psychological warfare. When companies deliberately target vulnerable populations with predatory practices, they're not just stealing money, they're destroying the social trust that allows communities to function, Dr. Carter explains to Anderson Cooper's audience. The psychological damage extends across generations, creating patterns of financial anxiety and institutional distrust that affect children and grandchildren. The interview triggers an avalanche of similar testimonies as families across the country recognize their own experiences in Maria's story. The Sterling Truth hashtag begins trending again, this time amplified by victim testimonies that provide human faces for statistical evidence of systematic exploitation that previously existed only in federal investigation files and academic research papers gathering dust in university libraries. James Wilson, the environmental health researcher whose 7-year-old daughter developed leukemia after Sterling Properties concealed groundwater contamination from industrial chemicals, testifies before an emergency congressional hearing convened by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's office. His presentation includes medical records documenting elevated cancer rates in Sterling-developed neighborhoods, alongside internal company emails joking about externalized health costs, affecting minority families who lack resources to challenge environmental violations. Sterling Properties knew about environmental contamination before they sold us contaminated land, Dr. Wilson tells the packed congressional hearing room, his voice carrying the controlled anger of someone whose child nearly died from corporate negligence. They had soil studies, groundwater analysis, and health impact assessments that clearly showed dangerous levels of industrial chemicals. They sold us poisoned land and called it the American dream, while knowing our children would pay the price with their health. The congressional testimony airs live on C-SPAN, reaching policymakers and activists who immediately begin organizing federal legislation to prevent similar exploitation. Representative Ocasio-Cortez announces introduction of the Predatory Lending Prevention Act, comprehensive legislation designed to close regulatory loopholes that allow systematic wealth extraction from vulnerable communities while providing criminal penalties for executives who authorize discriminatory practices targeting minority populations. Senator Elizabeth Warren convenes emergency hearings of the Senate Banking Committee, calling Charles Sterling to testify under oath about his company's business practices before television cameras that will broadcast his responses to millions of Americans whose families have suffered similar exploitation. The hearing room fills beyond capacity as victims, advocates, and media representatives witness Sterling's attempt to defend decades of systematic exploitation that federal prosecutors are preparing to prosecute under racketeering statutes. Charles Sterling appears before senators with the defeated expression of someone whose life's work has been revealed as a criminal enterprise operating under a legitimate business facade. "We always operated within the bounds of applicable regulations," he tells Senator Warren, his voice lacking conviction as she displays internal company emails discussing strategies to circumvent fair housing protections while maximizing profit extraction from minority families during vulnerable economic periods. "Mr. Sterling," Senator Warren responds, her voice carrying prosecutorial authority that makes television viewers lean forward in anticipation. "Your company's training materials explicitly instruct employees to target minority families with predatory refinancing during periods of economic stress. How is that operating within regulatory bounds when federal law explicitly prohibits such discriminatory targeting?" The exchange becomes a viral video clip shared millions of times across social media platforms, Senator Warren's methodical dismantling of Sterling's defenses providing a satisfying spectacle for audiences hungry for accountability from systematic corporate abuse of vulnerable populations that has operated with impunity for decades while regulatory agencies failed to protect affected communities. Former Sterling Properties employees begin testifying publicly about company culture that celebrated wealth extraction from minority communities while avoiding taxes that fund social services for affected populations. Michelle Rodriguez, a former sales manager who worked at Sterling for 8 years before her conscience forced her to resign, appears on 60 Minutes to describe internal training programs that taught explicitly racist targeting strategies. "We had different scripts for different demographics," Michelle tells CBS correspondent Bill Whitaker, her testimony providing an insider perspective on systematic discrimination that violates multiple federal laws. Spanish-speaking families got materials that omitted environmental hazard disclosures required by law. Black families got refinancing offers timed to coincide with medical emergencies or job losses. It was deliberate targeting of vulnerable moments when families couldn't think clearly about contract terms or legal implications. The 60 Minutes investigation reaches 20 million viewers, many of whom recognize their own experiences in the systematic exploitation patterns Michelle describes with devastating precision that reveals corporate strategy designed to maximize vulnerability exploitation. The program includes hidden camera footage of Sterling Properties sales meetings where executives discuss demographic optimization and profit maximization through strategic targeting of minority communities using language that would make federal prosecutors celebrate. Anonymous Sterling Properties executives begin leaking internal documents to federal investigators and news organizations, providing smoking gun evidence of conspiracy to violate civil rights laws. The leaked materials include audio recordings of company leadership discussing strategies to avoid regulatory scrutiny while maximizing extraction from high-yield demographic targets in language that reveals conscious intent to discriminate based on race and economic status. The audio recordings, played during congressional hearings, feature Charles Sterling's voice discussing techniques for managing regulatory exposure while maintaining extraction efficiency from minority communities. The recordings provide evidence of intentional discrimination that federal prosecutors need for criminal conspiracy charges that could result in decades of prison sentences for Sterling family members and corporate co-conspirators. FBI raids, Sterling Properties headquarters, and Charles Sterling's personal residences, seizing computers, financial records, and communications that investigators believe contain additional evidence of systematic criminal activity extending beyond predatory lending into tax evasion and political corruption. The raids receive extensive media coverage, with news helicopters broadcasting live footage of federal agents carrying bankers' boxes from Sterling family properties while protesters cheer outside. The federal raids trigger cooperation from additional whistleblowers throughout the real estate development industry, former employees at competing companies who recognize similar practices at their own firms. The expanding investigation reveals that Sterling Properties' business model represents widespread industry practice that has extracted billions of dollars from minority communities nationwide through coordinated exploitation strategies that federal regulators failed to detect or prevent. Victims' advocacy groups organize across affected communities, creating networks that share information about predatory practices while supporting families seeking legal remedies for systematic exploitation. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People announces class action lawsuits against Sterling Properties and affiliated companies, seeking damages for civil rights violations spanning multiple decades of coordinated wealth extraction from communities that trusted legitimate business institutions. Environmental justice organizations join the expanding coalition, connecting Sterling Properties practices to broader patterns of environmental racism that concentrate pollution and health hazards in communities that lack political power to resist corporate exploitation. The Sierra Club announces support for federal legislation requiring comprehensive environmental disclosure in all real estate transactions, with criminal penalties for concealment that endangers public health. International human rights organizations begin monitoring the Sterling Properties case as an example of systematic wealth extraction that violates international conventions protecting economic rights of minority populations. Amnesty International issues a report connecting Sterling's practices to global patterns of economic exploitation that constitute crimes against humanity perpetrated through legitimate business structures that avoid international oversight. The expanding investigation reveals Sterling Properties' coordination with international financial institutions to launder profits through offshore accounts while avoiding taxes that fund social services for affected communities. Federal investigators discover Sterling family assets hidden in 12 countries, requiring international cooperation to trace money flows and recover stolen wealth from victims who deserve compensation for decades of systematic exploitation. Serena Williams Davis maintains strategic public silence while providing comprehensive cooperation with federal investigations and congressional oversight committees. Her decision to avoid media attention while investigations proceed demonstrates understanding that systematic change requires institutional action rather than individual celebrity, allowing victims' voices to dominate public narrative about corporate accountability and civil rights enforcement. Pinnacle Investment Group announces establishment of a $100 million victim compensation fund, providing immediate financial assistance to families affected by Sterling Properties' predatory practices while federal investigations and litigation continue. The fund represents the largest private commitment to predatory lending victims in American history, setting precedent for corporate accountability that other firms will be expected to follow. The voices of the systematically exploited have found their platform, and their chorus is growing stronger every day. 6 months after Madison Sterling's slap echoed through the Plaza Ballroom, the most significant congressional hearing on predatory lending in American history convenes in the Rayburn House Office Building. Committee Chairman Maxine Waters gavels the session to order as C-SPAN cameras broadcast live to 40 million viewers worldwide, witnessing the systematic dismantling of an empire built on the exploitation of vulnerable communities across multiple states and decades of systematic wealth extraction. The hearing room overflows with capacity crowds, including Sterling Properties victims, civil rights advocates, environmental justice organizations, and financial reform activists who have traveled from across the country to witness this moment of reckoning. Maria Gonzalez sits in the front row, wearing her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable possession Sterling Properties didn't manage to steal from her family's generational wealth accumulated through decades of sacrifice and homeownership. Serena Williams Davis takes her seat at the witness table with the composed authority of someone who has spent 7 months building an unassailable case against systematic corporate criminality that extends far beyond individual misconduct into institutional patterns of exploitation. Before her lies a presentation that will reshape how predatory lending is prosecuted in America, complete with evidence that federal prosecutors are already using to build racketeering cases against multiple defendants. Miss Williams Davis, Chairwoman Waters begins, her voice carrying the weight of someone who has spent decades fighting for financial justice against institutions that believe themselves untouchable. Your investigation into Sterling Properties has uncovered evidence of systematic exploitation affecting thousands of families across 12 states. Please share your findings with the American people who deserve to understand how this happened. Serena activates the presentation screen behind her, displaying aerial photographs of Sterling Properties developments clustered around toxic waste sites, chemical plants, and industrial facilities that create environmental hazards affecting multiple generations of residents. Chairwoman Waters, what we discovered goes beyond simple predatory lending into systematic human rights violations perpetrated through legitimate business structures designed to extract maximum wealth while externalizing all costs to affected communities. The first slide displays a map of Sterling Properties developments across 12 states, each marker representing communities where families lost generational wealth through refinancing schemes designed to guarantee eventual default and property seizure. Red dots concentrate in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, revealing targeting patterns that violate federal fair housing laws with mathematical precision that demonstrates conscious intent to discriminate. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leans forward, studying the evidence with the intensity of someone whose district includes families affected by similar exploitation patterns throughout New York's working-class neighborhoods. Ms. Williams-Davis, can you quantify the total wealth extraction from these systematically targeted communities over the 15-year period your investigation covered? Congressman Ocasio-Cortez, our comprehensive analysis indicates Sterling Properties extracted approximately $6 billion in equity from minority-owned properties over 15 years, representing generational wealth that families built through decades of savings and home ownership while contributing to community economic development. Serena's response carries statistical authority that transforms individual tragedies into evidence of systematic economic warfare designed to concentrate wealth while destabilizing targeted communities. The hearing room erupts in gasps and murmurs as audience members process the magnitude of wealth extraction that represents thousands of families' life savings systematically stolen through legal mechanisms designed to circumvent consumer protection regulations. Camera phones record reactions from victims who finally understand the scope of their exploitation, while mainstream media capture their emotional responses for evening news broadcasts. Senator Elizabeth Warren, attending as special witness due to her expertise in financial consumer protection, addresses the broader implications for financial system stability that extend beyond individual corporate misconduct. Ms. Williams-Davis, if Sterling Properties' business model represents widespread industry practice throughout the real estate development sector, what are the systemic risks to housing market stability nationwide? Serena displays charts showing correlation between predatory lending targeting and neighborhood economic decline, demonstrating how systematic wealth extraction destabilizes entire communities while concentrating profits in offshore accounts that avoid contributing to local economic development or social infrastructure. Senator Warren, we're seeing patterns similar to the subprime mortgage crisis, but specifically targeting communities that lack political power to resist exploitation or demand regulatory enforcement. The presentation continues with audio recordings of Sterling Properties executives discussing strategies for avoiding regulatory scrutiny while maximizing extraction efficiency from minority communities using language that reduces human beings to demographic data points. The recordings, played through the hearing room sound system, feature Charles Sterling's voice using dehumanizing language that reduces families to demographic targets and profit opportunities while joking about externalized social costs. Representative Katie Porter produces calculators and charts, her signature prop-based questioning style perfectly suited for exposing financial exploitation with mathematical precision that makes abstract corporate crime concrete and understandable for television audiences. Ms. Williams-Davis, using Sterling Properties' own internal data and financial records, can you calculate the average wealth loss per affected family? Serena consults Pinnacle's comprehensive financial analysis, her response carrying the devastating clarity of someone who has quantified systematic injustice down to individual dollar amounts that represent real families' destroyed economic security. Representative Porter, the average family lost approximately $78,000 in equity through Sterling's refinancing schemes. representing wealth that took generations to accumulate through home ownership and community investment while building stable neighborhoods. The mathematical presentation of systematic exploitation creates powerful television moments as representatives use Sterling Properties' own internal documents to demonstrate the calculated nature of wealth extraction targeting that reveals conscious corporate strategy designed to maximize vulnerability exploitation. The hearing becomes educational theater, teaching American audiences about predatory lending mechanics while providing a satisfying spectacle of accountability for systematic corporate criminality. Dr. James Wilson testifies about environmental health impacts affecting children in Sterling Properties developments, his presentation including medical records documenting elevated cancer rates in neighborhoods where Sterling deliberately concealed environmental contamination from prospective buyers to maintain property values. "My daughter's leukemia is not an isolated case," he tells the committee, his voice carrying parental anguish that resonates with viewers nationwide while providing evidence of corporate negligence that endangered children's health. The environmental testimony transforms the hearing from financial misconduct investigation into public health crisis examination, revealing how systematic exploitation extends beyond wealth extraction into community health destruction that affects multiple generations of residents who trusted legitimate business institutions. Dr. Wilson's slides show cancer clusters in Sterling developments that company executives knew about but concealed to avoid cleanup costs. Michelle Rodriguez, the former Sterling Properties sales manager who resigned after her conscience forced recognition of the company's systematic discrimination, provides insider testimony about training programs that explicitly instructed employees to target minority families during vulnerable economic periods. Her testimony includes internal sales scripts designed to exploit language barriers and financial stress while concealing predatory contract terms through deliberate obfuscation. "We were taught to identify families facing medical emergencies, job losses, or immigration concerns," Michelle tells the committee, her insider perspective providing evidence of systematic discrimination that violates multiple federal laws. The company deliberately targeted vulnerability because desperate families don't read contract fine print carefully or have resources to challenge predatory terms in court. The insider testimony provides smoking gun evidence of intentional discrimination that federal prosecutors need for criminal conspiracy charges against Sterling family members and corporate co-conspirators throughout the real estate industry. Michelle's detailed description of company culture reveals systematic racism extending far beyond individual prejudices into institutional practices designed to maximize exploitation while maintaining plausible legal deniability. Charles Sterling appears via video link from a federal detention facility, where he awaits trial on racketeering charges that could result in life imprisonment for operating a systematic criminal enterprise under legitimate business cover. His testimony, delivered under oath with obvious legal coaching, attempts to minimize his knowledge of discriminatory practices, while federal prosecutors prepare additional charges based on evidence emerging from congressional investigation. "Mr. Sterling!" Chairwoman Waters addresses the screen, displaying his haggard appearance that reveals privileges collapse when confronted with accountability. Internal company emails show you personally approving targeting strategies that explicitly identified minority communities for predatory refinancing schemes. How do you explain this documented evidence of your direct involvement? Charles Sterling's responses reveal someone whose privilege has been permanently shattered by accountability he never expected to face during decades of systematic exploitation that generated billions in profits. "Chairwoman Waters, I relied on subordinates for operational details and may not have fully understood the implications of certain business practices that were presented to me as standard industry procedures. The weak defense provides no protection against federal prosecution while failing to satisfy committee members who have spent months reviewing evidence of Sterling's personal involvement in systematic exploitation schemes that required executive approval. His testimony becomes additional evidence for prosecutors building comprehensive criminal cases against multiple defendants. Madison Sterling refuses to testify, invoking Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination while facing federal charges for conspiracy and civil rights violations that could result in decades of imprisonment. Her absence from the hearing creates a powerful visual metaphor for privilege's retreat when confronted with consequences that money and influence cannot circumvent through traditional power structures. Federal prosecutors announce additional indictments against Sterling Properties executives, real estate brokers, and financial institutions that participated in systematic exploitation schemes targeting vulnerable communities. The expanding criminal investigation reveals predatory lending networks extending throughout multiple industries, triggering congressional demands for comprehensive financial sector reform that closes regulatory loopholes enabling systematic exploitation. The hearing concludes with unanimous bipartisan condemnation of Sterling Properties practices and commitment to legislative reforms preventing similar exploitation while providing victim compensation mechanisms. The Predatory Lending Prevention Act passes committee with overwhelming support, establishing criminal penalties for executives who authorize discriminatory targeting while requiring comprehensive disclosure of environmental hazards that affect community health. Serena Williams Davis delivers closing testimony that transforms individual corporate accountability cases into broader examination of systematic wealth inequality affecting American communities nationwide. This investigation began with one family's tragedy and revealed systematic exploitation affecting thousands of families whose generational wealth was extracted through legal mechanisms designed to circumvent civil rights protections while concentrating profits in offshore accounts that avoid contributing to affected communities. The congressional hearing's impact extends beyond Sterling Properties accountability into broader financial sector reform, triggering regulatory changes that close loopholes allowing systematic exploitation while establishing victim compensation mechanisms funded through corporate accountability measures that require wealth restoration to affected communities. International human rights observers praise the congressional investigation as a model for corporate accountability that could be replicated globally, while financial markets adapt to the new regulatory environment requiring comprehensive disclosure of predatory lending practices and environmental hazards that affect community health and economic stability. The hearing room erupts in sustained applause as Chairwoman Waters concludes the session, victims and advocates celebrating progress towards systematic justice that began with Madison Sterling's racist attack on someone she catastrophically underestimated. Outside the Capitol building, Maria Gonzalez addresses reporters with the confidence of someone whose voice has been amplified by institutional power and congressional recognition of systematic injustice. Today, Congress heard our stories and took action. Madison Sterling's hatred became the catalyst for justice that will protect future families from the exploitation that destroyed our communities and stole our generational wealth. The system has spoken, and its verdict demands transformation. 1 year after Madison Sterling's slap echoed through the Plaza Ballroom, Serena Williams Davis stood in the same space where her humiliation became the catalyst for systematic change across America. Tonight's gathering celebrates something far more powerful than charity. It honors the restoration of justice to communities that corporate predators believed would remain voiceless forever. The ballroom has been transformed into exhibition space, documenting the Sterling Properties investigation's impact on financial reform nationwide. Display boards show photographs of families who reclaimed stolen wealth, communities rebuilt after environmental remediation, and children attending schools funded by recovered assets that Sterling Properties attempted to hide in offshore accounts. Maria Gonzalez approaches the podium wearing her grandmother's pearl necklace, no longer the only valuable possession Sterling Properties failed to steal. Behind her stands the Brooklyn brownstone that 3 generations of women built through sacrifice, now restored to family ownership through victim compensation funds that returned $6 billion to affected communities. 1 year ago, Madison Sterling asked if we knew who she was. Maria tells the audience of lawmakers, advocates, and journalists who have gathered to witness justice's evolution. Tonight, we know exactly who we are. Survivors who transformed individual tragedy into systematic change that will protect future generations from predatory exploitation. The applause thunders through marble halls where Madison Sterling once believed her privilege granted immunity from consequences. Federal prosecutors have secured convictions against 43 defendants in the Sterling Properties racketeering case, with Charles Sterling sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for operating a criminal enterprise disguised as legitimate business. Madison Sterling served 15 years for conspiracy and civil rights violations, her appeal rejected by federal courts that found overwhelming evidence of systematic discrimination targeting minority communities. Her conviction established legal precedent for prosecuting racist violence that enables systematic wealth extraction through predatory business practices. Dr. James Wilson presents environmental remediation data showing toxic cleanup completion in Sterling Properties developments, funded by asset forfeiture from criminal prosecutions. His daughter, now cancer-free after successful treatment, plays with other children in community gardens built where industrial waste sites once poisoned neighborhoods for decades. Sterling Properties stole our wealth and poisoned our communities, Dr. Wilson tells the gathering, his voice carrying hope rather than the anguish that characterized his congressional testimony. But our resistance transformed individual suffering into collective power that holds corporations accountable for environmental racism and predatory targeting of vulnerable populations. The Predatory Lending Prevention Act, signed into law 6 months after congressional hearings, established criminal penalties for systematic wealth extraction while requiring comprehensive environmental disclosure in real estate transactions. Enforcement agencies have investigated over 200 companies using similar business models, recovering billions in stolen wealth for affected communities. Serena Williams Davis takes the podium where Madison Sterling once stood in triumph, surveying faces that represent successful resistance against systematic exploitation. Pinnacle Investment Group's Victim Compensation Fund has distributed $100 million while establishing community development initiatives that build generational wealth rather than extracting it. Power isn't what you take from others, Serena tells the audience, her voice carrying the quiet authority that destroyed Sterling Properties through patient investigation and strategic action. Real power is what you build for communities that deserve justice, prosperity, and protection from predatory institutions that view human suffering as profit opportunities. The evening's centerpiece reveals the Sterling Properties headquarters transformation into an affordable housing complex named for Maria Gonzalez's grandmother, its lobby displaying photographs of families whose resistance created accountability for systematic corporate criminality. 90% of units house families displaced by predatory lending schemes, their rent subsidized by asset forfeiture from criminal prosecutions. Federal Reserve Chairman Powell addresses regulatory reforms triggered by Sterling Properties investigation, noting that financial institutions now face criminal liability for participating in predatory lending networks targeting vulnerable communities. Banking industry compliance costs have increased dramatically as institutions implement systems preventing discriminatory targeting while ensuring community reinvestment. The Sterling Properties case demonstrated that systematic exploitation requires systematic response, Chairman Powell explains to the gathering. We've established oversight mechanisms that make predatory lending networks visible to regulators while providing communities with tools to report suspicious targeting patterns that violate civil rights protections. Senator Elizabeth Warren announces expansion of congressional oversight authority to investigate predatory practices throughout real estate, healthcare, and financial services industries. The Sterling precedent enables federal prosecutors to pursue racketeering charges against any business that systematically targets vulnerable populations for wealth extraction while avoiding regulatory accountability. International human rights organizations have adopted Sterling Properties investigation methodologies for exposing corporate exploitation worldwide, while European Union regulators implement similar disclosure requirements for real estate transactions that affect minority communities. The case study influences corporate accountability legislation in 12 countries experiencing similar systematic wealth extraction patterns. Young financial professionals attend tonight's gathering to understand how individual moral courage can challenge institutional corruption that appears too powerful to resist. Serena Williams Davis has become a role model for using institutional power to protect rather than exploit vulnerable populations, inspiring career choices that prioritize community benefit over profit maximization. The evening concludes with Serena's challenge to audience members who control resources capable of creating systematic change or perpetuating exploitation that destroys communities built through generations of sacrifice. Tonight, you've witnessed what happens when someone with power decides to use it for justice rather than personal enrichment. She gestures toward photographs of families rebuilding their lives after recovering stolen wealth through legal processes that Madison Sterling's hatred inadvertently triggered. These families didn't need charity. They needed their stolen wealth returned and predatory institutions held accountable for systematic crimes disguised as legitimate business practices. The crowd rises in sustained applause as Serena Williams-Davis walks toward the Plaza Hotel exit, past the spot where Madison Sterling's slap began the accountability process that transformed American corporate law enforcement. Outside, Manhattan's financial district continues operating under a new regulatory framework that makes systematic exploitation far more difficult to execute without detection. Maria Gonzalez addresses reporters gathering on the red carpet where privilege once paraded without fear of consequences. Madison Sterling wanted everyone to know who she was. Now the whole world knows who she was, someone whose hatred became the catalyst for justice that will protect communities for generations. As midnight approaches, the Plaza ballroom empties with satisfaction that justice, though delayed, has created institutional changes preventing similar exploitation of vulnerable families. The Sterling Properties investigation proved that systematic corporate criminality can be exposed and prosecuted when someone with sufficient power decides accountability matters more than maintaining comfortable relationships with profitable institutions. The viral video that began with humiliation and hatred has evolved into an educational tool teaching communities how to recognize and resist predatory targeting while building political power necessary for regulatory enforcement. Madison Sterling's question, "Do you know who I am?" became a rallying cry for systematic change that continues expanding across industries that exploit vulnerable populations. Serena Williams-Davis disappears into Manhattan night, knowing that real power operates through sustained institutional change rather than individual celebrity, understanding that tonight's celebration marks progress toward justice rather than final victory in ongoing struggle against systematic exploitation of communities that deserve protection rather than predation. Smash that subscribe button if you believe silent power beats loud privilege. Share this story if you want to see more accounts where the oppressed become the queens of their own narratives. Comment below. If you had $52 billion to fight injustice, what would your first move be? Like if you believe in the power of truth over privilege and justice over wealth. #know who I am, silent power loud justice, Wall Street slap, justice served, power reversal. Your voice matters. Your share amplifies truth. Your engagement builds the movement. What power do you have that you haven't used for justice?